Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insights Podcast with your hosts, Franklin Grimberg and Edward Walton, where we discuss Microsoft 365 security and Azure security news and products. Recorded August 11, 2021. Good evening, Franklin. How are you?
Good evening, Edward. How are you?
I am doing the best that I can until I know better, because when you know better, you do better.
You've already lost me in the first 3 seconds of the show.
I lost me too.
Way deep. Jeez.
Oh yeah. It's just like that thing that you can't disprove, and you just got to say, man, get out of here. Like, everything that you're looking for is always in the last place you look for it. That's where you.
So we have to do our weekly check-in here on your SC200.
I still haven't been able to register. So I'm not trying to do it at home. I'm going to go to a testing facility. There is one about 2.5 miles from my house. It's actually in the same building or next to the same building as Honey Baked Ham headquarters. So you can just smell the ham. Smell the ham. That should be a tagline for our podcast. Smell the ham. So what did I do this week? I'm playing with a bunch of MCAS stuff. And one thing I've noticed is that a lot of things haven't been really announced with a lot of fanfare. I've gone through Sentinel, man, and I work in the stuff every day. I'm like, when did this come out? Right? So sometimes the product team will say it won't say anything. Sometimes CXE over at Microsoft will say it won't say anything. But when you go in, the first thing, I wish there was a way you could just.
I think they do.
Well, in news and
do they
guides,
announce everything?
What they do, it's a combination of where you fall in it. Tech community. If you go to the Sentinel theme that has news and guides, I won't say it's useless. I don't want any of the folks over in the Sentinel product team hear me say that, right? But I mean, it's always
isn't there
a
a weekly newsletter that tells us everything that changed? You haven't signed up for that newsletter yet?
I probably do get it.
There's a guy named Rod Trent that puts out a weekly newsletter.
Oh man, bye. Yes, I do. I you know what? I'm gonna bring up Rod Trent blog right now. There you go. Matter of fact, if you don't show up in DuckDuckGo, you don't exist. He's actually Trent is his page is one of my favorites in my homepage when I come up. Right. I haven't had time. I do it, so I do read Rod stuff at least every other day. I scroll through it, but even then, I remember podcast before last, I asked Rod a question and I stumped him. He didn't know the answer about how does that number in the honey queries get populated? What's the difference between that number and that number? He wouldn't have found out, right?
And put it out as a blog post.
It's a blog post because he's like, I don't know, Edward. I'm like, every theory we came up, we do a little bit like, well, that debunked that. That's not how it happened. That's not how it happened.
I was actually wrong about one of the numbers too. I thought that they were, one of them was queries that were deactivated because of timeouts, but that's not what it was. So I didn't bring that up in the show, but I thought it's because your rules, your scheduled queries can actually time out, then they'll be deactivated. So I thought it was the same sort of thing on your hunting queries, but I was wrong.
Yeah, that's not what it was either. So yeah, Rod figured out. He asked around, and evidently he had to ask a few people to get. I won't ever say the right answer.
Yeah, what drives me crazy is when somebody calls you up with a question, they say, this isn't working. I'm like, did you try this? They're like, okay, we'll call you back and we'll tell you if we'll call you back. And then they go days and never call me back and tell me if that's, if that actually solved the problem or not. It drives me crazy. If you ask me a question about something, please take the time to let me know what even if I was wrong, I like to know, what the answer was. That just drives me crazy. So
I'll try to follow up. I'm beyond the days of calling support, and calling engineering. And then the other thing is, if you call about it, you may not get the answer, especially if there's a malfunction to what you're trying to get done. Then next thing you know, you go into the product and it's working. Like, oh, you called something out, they fixed it, but they didn't tell you. So
did they have you reboot Azure?
Yeah, I did reboot Azure. Something's going on in my Azure environment. So one thing I want to show, I've been downtime studying. I'm going to go ahead and sign up for the SC200. Long story. Tom. Let's not go down that road about me and the SE 200 exam, right? And I'm gonna take a couple of days off. I have some family stuff that I got to get taken care of, so I'm
Let's
gonna
just
do
say
that.
on the SC200, Edward didn't let me down. So he's got to take the test again.
So Franklin's inside joke is it said the exam must be legitimate if Ed doesn't pass the first time. If he passes the first time, it's an illegitimate exam. Like Franklin's like the answers can be there, and Ed will choose the wrong answer. It'll say choose this answer, Ed. I'll choose the wrong one, right? Like you're trying to trick me. When we do our quarterly rehash, we'll go back to some of my favorite moments, and we may do a section and say whatever happened with.
I take tests the way you take tests, Edward. Apparently, I'm right there with you. Right there with you.
True.
Yeah.
True. I scored a 0 on a Microsoft exam. A SQL exam.
That's talent.
Wow, that takes skill. That is defying all probabilities.
You get the little piece of paper and you get the lines. There were no lines. Like, you need improvement. Are you even in IT? What are you doing here? Right?
Awesome.
Did the people at the desk just die laughing when they gave it to you, or what?
Or do they think the system was broken? They're probably like,
they got it out. When you come out, they go, "Hey, how you doing? Your key, get your stuff." When they take it off, they don't look at your score. It prints downward. They just hand it to you. And I go, they're like, "Oh, you did well." Hold on, something's wrong with the printer. No, that's right. You're not out of ink. There was no ink to be used. That's a 0. And it was a SQL exam. I needed it to take because I was working for a company and they needed this to be able to get gold. Remember back in the day, gold was important, something like that, right?
All right, so we have a guest this week.
We have a guest. So we have Mr. Tom Quinn from Microsoft. But before we get to Tom, you're trying to avoid me talking about watch lists. You're going to see this. So make me host so I can show you this. You're going to see this watch list. You're going to like it. And I thought it was cool because they're getting better. So evidently they're taking heed to whatever you were saying and intimidating them over the product group. But when I thought a media of 3 customers that said, "Hey, this is what we want." And they've been doing it sort of, for lack of a better word, they've been doing it ass backwards. I've never seen it ass backwards. We'll see. So, am I host?
Oh, you need a host. Sorry. I was answering chat. Host. Sorry.
Yeah. I got to get better and get into this. Where did my Twitch stream go? There it is. That delay is throwing me totally off. And yeah, Tom, this is my office.
I like it.
It's just a background. Don't listen to him.
This is mine.
See, watch me reach into the wall.
Oh. Very nice.
Just like that, right? All right. So I'm the host now. I have the power. So let me show you guys this real quick. And I'm actually getting better at Zoom. So in watch lists, for those who don't know, what is it? Azure Defender watch list allows the collection of data and external data source for correlation events and so on. So just basically closer scrutiny to a subset of things that you want closer introspection on, right? IP address, entities and artifacts. I can look at these things more closely and see if there's any type of correlation, any type of cohesiveness in activities that would be a indicator or precursor or postcursor. Something has already happened, right? Because in the world of SIM, I would say 95% of anything related to a SIM is already happened because you're looking at logs, right? And events and alerts, unless you're doing live stream in Sentinel or whatever another SIM's live stream manifestation is. Every SIM calls it different. But watch lists, think of it as a list of high value entities or interesting entities that you want to keep an eye on. So in it, you can go in, you basically take a CSV file, you put in the entities in a format that is accepted by it, right? But they have templates here. So instead of having to pull that CSV down, making sure you got the columns right, the formatting right, the headers right, you can do these things. Well, now what I like about it, let me make that small right here, is that here, one of the CXE guys, big shout out to Chris Muniz, been on the show, friend of the show, come back on. We want to have you back on and talk some more stuff, is you can come over, do your thing, and you can say, hey, I want to create this. So if you click on it, right here, I can download the script this that I could create from here. Now, if I download the schema, it's downloading the format. But if I want to create from template, I go here, so I can download the schema, right? It'll download it, ask the way to put it, right. VIP user, and throw it on my desktop, right. And then once you have it, it's going to look crazy messy over here, but these are going to be the columns. Now, obviously, I would save this into a Excel format, do my thing, and then save it back to what I need to do to get it to work, right? But what I like about it, once you have it in place, come here, you can then just drag it and drop it in here, right? Or you can browse with files, and then once you go review and create, it's going to error out because there's no information in here. This allows you to say a list of contacts and employees that have value within an organization. So this sort of existed in the other products. Microsoft Defender for Office 365 called it, the policy was for whales, right? Your CIO, VPs, it was a policy. That's what it did for protecting impersonation and spoofing between your executive and high value targets. In Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, there is one called HVTs, or high value endpoints, where you can identify certain endpoints. So in addition to the things that NDE does, it can look at those endpoints and say, because of the person that uses this endpoint, as well as what this endpoint use is, and maybe where it's located, keep a closer eye on this. So I like that feature in this. I'm going to play around a little bit more because I actually have a customer that wants to dig into this. And they're talking about I want to see if we can push the upper limit on how big that CSV file can be. Right. And they want to combine it, right, to be able to do these things. So we'll see. So you can't be expert in everything. So and that's what I wanted to do. 2 reasons. I thought it was cool. Second reason, I know that it just irks Frank to talk about watch lists, right? So
well, what's it actually doing? If you don't mind me asking a quick question, behind the scenes, is it more of a prioritization of the
so let's just say you have the whale list, right?
Yeah.
And basically, when you're writing KQL queries, so think about SQL queries, right? There's actually a watch list table, I forget the actual name of it, that it just stores that data in. So then you can query and get the subset of data whale list. Then you can actually use it in your KQL query for doing your correlation for whatever you're doing. So in theory, I like watch lists. There's just a more efficient way of doing it in KQL using the external data command to pull from, let's say, blob storage or whatever, then storing it inside log analytics. So if Edward goes to logs up there at the top, and well, that's kind of new.
It's manifesting this way because I got the long screen. I've never seen it do this before.
Yeah,
I think it's trying to adjust it because I got the long screen rather than the short screen.
I'm not seeing where they show all the tables. Can you show all the tables? Where is that with that strange format that you have there?
It's just trying to fit it in. That's what it's doing.
So if you go to Azure Sentinel, I believe there's going to be another one. Try custom logs. I don't know where it's at. Try Azure. Yeah.
Oh, you want to see the watch list?
Yeah, the watch list table.
Oh, right here. I think it's right here. Where is it? You know the cool part about this? You don't have to do what I'm doing, which is called Easter egg. So I don't have it. Oh, maybe I'm not using watch list. That's why I don't have it, right?
Yeah, maybe it's not created yet. So
it's not created. So once you do it once, these tables. Let me see something. Yeah, once you create one, then the schema expands and now it's ready for any subsequent work that you're going to do in watch list, right? But it's not manifesting here because I don't either have the data sources or I have never done it.
It's just a big reference table with multiple, reference tables in it based upon a column. So watch lists are good. The concept's good. You need them to help make things more efficient. in your alerting. There was just a way to do it with a keyword to go out to a blob storage to pull in stuff. So it was easier just to dump a CSV or Excel file out to the blob storage than having to come out here, delete the watch list, re-add the watch list again because you couldn't update it before. But now they've put in all that functionality and make your life much easier. So, but at the time, that's why I was so down on it. So Edward, who do we have tonight?
Who do we have? I'm going to stop sharing. And before I forget, I'm going to go back and make you host so I go more. No,
the other fun thing for me is watching Microsoft people learn how to use Zoom on the every week, you know.
Yeah. So how do I make you host again?
I'm still learning it.
I go to participants, and then I click on, do I click Frank and make Frank host? There it is, make Frank host. There you go. All right. So who do we have? To our listeners, supporters, Patreons, and whomever else out there, we have Mr. Tom Quinn. Mr. Quinn has multiple titles at Microsoft. I've had the pleasure to work with him and actually work with him on the client a couple of days ago, right? Pretty good call. And I have an update on that came across my plate today that threw me totally for a loop. And I got to tell Tom about this. I forgot because I got busy today. And I'll send that over to you. I'm like, wow, I wonder if Tom knows about this. So Tom has multiple roles. If you were to ask him, he could be a technical specialist. He could be a global black belt over at Microsoft. I think one time he looked on his employment portal. He was a global black belt for Microsoft Dynamics. Dynamics, right. He has deep experience security, but my introduction to Mr. Quinn is because he is an Azure Security Center or Azure Defender for Servers expert, right? Plus all other things in Azure security that are not related to Microsoft 365 security workloads. WAF, DDoS, VPN. Is Key Vault part of your coverage? Key Vault's not your coverage.
Well, historically, it's been everything on the Azure platform.
Yeah. So I'll allow him to come in and bolster that intro, but we wanted him on, and what we're trying to do is sort of let our guests define what they want to talk about. But what I'm liking to hear now is what's something that you should be telling users should be using that they need to know that they may have missed because they don't watch Rod Trent's blog post, Edward, right? And if a customer had to deploy one security workload, in Azure, not M365 related because of the guest, and then we may ask you M365 stuff, right? What would you say, hey, you're going to get some bang for your buck with this out of the box. You need to deploy this, or if you haven't, you're doing yourself a disservice. So Tom, I'll hand the floor over to you, sir. Like you said, we're very loose. We're red cup security.
I like. Well,
you never know what may be in here, right? Get us creative. So Tom, the floor is yours, sir.
I've got a big jug. This is, basically opaque. No one knows what's in here. Drink them all day.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Well,
Go ahead, sir.
I like your club. I want to be in your club, Edward. So now I'm kind of go by and still think I like to focus on Azure security and compliance all up. And by compliance, I don't mean Microsoft compliance workloads, but working with customers and how they achieve and meet their compliance objectives on the platform. But as part of all of that, one of the things I focus on a great deal would be things like Azure Defender, how that fits in with how customers can meet their ultimate security objectives. Historically, things like networking and networking controls, native services to the platform, but also just all up when it comes to customers. In fact, I was writing this up today. Hey, when a customer wants to use Azure, what do they have to understand in order to move forward? What's the security team? What's the risk team? What's the networking team, the identity team? They generally have to get their head wrapped around it before they even start using Azure. And so that's what I've been focusing on really for about 9 years. Working with customers around, hey, I want to start looking at using Azure. My security team, identity team, networking team, they all want to figure out, hey, how do I move this forward? How do I use this beast? In particular, focusing on the security and compliance teams. And as part of that, using native services, and thankfully we have so many native security-oriented services to choose from, it kind of makes their decision a little bit easier, and they will then start looking at what other workloads, more and more workloads they can deploy on Azure, and really how to secure those workloads. So it's been a really interesting experience watching us mature and watching our customers mature since Azure was introduced, really.
Well, you said something that made the gears above my bald head churn. You said you've been doing this for 9 years. How? Yeah.
Yeah.
How old is Azure?
It's been
11 years.
Oh, I don't even know. What a good question. I was a TSP shortly after it was introduced to market.
You wouldn't know a guy named Tom Patterson, would you?
I don't know Tom Patterson.
He was one of the very first Azure evangelists because he was a huge Docker guy and virtualization guy. He came from VMware or something. And so, yeah, I mean, if you were 9 years in, you're not too far behind the true inception or creation of Azure. Because remember, when Azure first came out, I was all about it, right? I was all about cloud. And when Azure first came out, it was nothing but IaaS. It was just a bunch of servers, right? That's all it was. Yeah. You just wanted a different place to put it.
All the demos I remember from Azure in the beginning was they would set up a wall and it make it look like Space Invaders or whatever. You know what I'm talking about? The demos that they showed all the servers coming up and it looked like Space Invaders. I don't know if you remember that or not.
It was really interesting. The reason I got so involved with security right away with Azure is when it was introduced, there were only, I think it was around 5 services on Azure, and they were all PaaS services. So we had worker roles, web roles, storage, and just raw Azure storage natively in the form of blobs and queues, as well as what's the one I'm missing? Jeez, with Azure storage. Anyway, coming page blobs, block blocks, as well as SQL database. That was it.
Yep.
Yeah. All internet-facing services. There was no concept of a virtual network. And so immediately I started approaching customers and they were talking about, hey, can I use this thing, Azure? How do I secure the network? I'm like, there's no network. Your controls are based around authentication authorization. And immediately that's I'm like, oh boy, we're going to have to really hunker down and focus on how customers secure this platform if they're going to consume it. And that's how I got involved in this role, and I've been working on it ever since. Once IaaS was introduced, and Corey Sanders kind of led that effort, worked with him and that team around how that gets secured. Then it's the plethora of services that came after that. So working with customers.
I came in not as early as you into the platform and starting to say, hey, this is what I want to sort of pivot my career. I purposely avoided AWS because it seemed like everybody was on that bandwagon. I said, I'm going to make Azure my pride. And if I had to have a secondary, it'd be Google, just because I wanted to be different. But I remember, I was late enough in the game that I got exposed to ASM before we went over to ARM, inside the portal, right? And I remember some of the challenges, like, doing this, you couldn't do it here, and classic. And I come from a networking background. So a lot of times I was, employers were super interested in me, because I knew route switch and the whole, VNets, VLANs and stuff. I was one of the very first people in the Southeast that knew how to set up express route.
Yeah.
How to get around in it, right? And it was, yeah, have tooth, get pliers, pull teeth out. And that's how you set up express route, right? So with that being said, we could talk the entire show about how the maturation of Azure, but I'd like to talk about current state.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you're working in now, and I'll stay away from Sentinel. You and I are working on some stuff in Azure Data Lake, but you were saying security and compliance. I think to clarify, or have you clarified, are you talking about compliance to regulatory bodies and frameworks?
Yep.
And posture? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, when you figure out customers, they oftentimes, not all, but most need to either make sure they design to a certain security framework. That might just be a corporate policy. They say, hey, we're aligning everything to ISO and NIST, for instance. Pretty common, especially amongst financial services and banks now. Financial services and banks, financial services and healthcare. And they have an external requirement to meet a certain set of regulations or regulatory frameworks. And this could be things like with banking. They may have to meet a certain set of requirements from their regulators. So it's an externally enforced and audited set of rules they have to live and abide by and prove it to them. And others would be different types of compliance regimes and compliance objectives, PCI, HIPAA, FedRAMP. So they are looking at, hey, I need to meet these objectives. I've got a thing I want to do on Azure. How do I properly do that when Microsoft is responsible for part of what I'm normally responsible for, all of it? So what do I do with a PaaS service? You're telling me I can't monitor and have an agent installed on that server for that PaaS service? How am I going to show to an auditor that I'm still compliant? Can I use an NSG to separate out my PCI scope from segment A and segment B? Is it stateful? Does it meet the requirements associated with PCI, which sometimes are old? A lot of these requirements from these different types of regimes and frameworks are kind of old and dated, and they'll state like you need a firewall. Well, NSG a firewall, is it stateful? Does that meet that objective? And so I'll work with them and determine, hey, you can or can't meet those objectives using different types of architectural patterns and models on things like Azure. How do they work and then show and demonstrate to auditors that they are compliant with what evidence and evidence we provide and evidence they need to generate as part of that shared responsibility model, shared compliance responsibility model. So that's a significant concern across the board for customers. That's one of the roles I fill on our side.
So let me dovetail into something, right? We are the Microsoft Security Insight podcast. We love any and all things, Microsoft Security, M360. Because if you look at the Microsoft model now, everything is, they want you Sentinel, and then they got Microsoft Defender, Azure Defender, and then at the bottom of it, we were talking about this, like XDR, right? The XDR is not a product. It is a process and ideology to saying if you do these things, right, you should theoretically be able to pull that out and put something up there and still will have XDR, right? You should be able to, if you can leave Sentinel and pull out, if you go to Defender, Microsoft Defender, pull out MDE and throw Palo Alto on it, right? You still have an XDR, right? You can pull out Azure Security Center and throw, I don't even know who the competitor is to Azure Security Center. Azure Defender, throw Qualys or something, I don't know. So you still have it. Are you finding, tell me what the prevailing way of doing this is? Is the customer putting it there, then securing it? Or are they securing it, then putting the stuff in there?
They're definitely getting their heads wrapped around it too as a concept. Everyone, I think from a security practitioner's point of view, it's kind of a label / idea similar to zero trust. If people are following core security best practices and principles, they're kind of already doing some of this. And like you said, it's like if I use a piece from here and a piece from there, am I still accomplishing the actual security objective? Maybe, maybe not. And it's interesting because where I think we add a lot of values that we stitch those pieces together to achieve a common goal, and which would be whether it be zero trust or whether it's XDR, because at that point it is cross domain and services and different levels that we're trying to make sure they monitor, and we have the appropriate detections and the right types of rules to look at across those different domain areas and different types of systems and services.
So you're absolutely right, Tom. It drives me crazy that they call XDR, extension detection and response, versus cross domain, what you just said. It drives me crazy that they don't call it that in there. So I have some questions for you, some very basic questions, if Edward's ready for basic questions.
First programming language was BASIC.
That's too bad. I'm happy to say my first programming language was Apple Pascal. So
really?
I technically never learned BASIC, and I think that's why I've been a successful programmer.
That's why my failures in life have occurred.
Assembly.
I went from basic to visual basic, and I've not ever been successful in my life. I know now.
So
Mhm.
it's a joke out there about basic. All right, so first of all, first before I get back to Tom there, there is the AZ 700 cert that came out, Edward, to add to your list to do the design and implementing Microsoft Azure networking solutions.
Mhm.
So make everybody aware of that. That's one that I'm very interested in. Like I said, I don't take the exams anymore unless I have to train it, be the MCT on it because I write questions for a lot of these. Now, to my simple questions. I have a server that I have to stand up, okay, in Azure.
Yeah.
Am I going to just connect that to Microsoft Defender for endpoint? Do I do that through Azure Defender? Then all that data goes to Microsoft Defender for endpoint. Anyways, what am I doing with inside Azure with my server that I'm standing up?
Perfect. Yep. And the horrible answer is always it depends. But in this case, I think the answer from our point of view, Microsoft point of view and best practice, would be to use and enable Azure Defender, as well as, and it includes Defender for endpoints. So Azure Defender, and just Azure Defender in general, all up, Azure Defender for servers, and then you have kind of other, I would say, Azure Defender capabilities. And I do want to talk about this because it's very relevant. The Azure Defender for servers, perfect. Azure Security Center historically was built to handle and help customers watch over their IaaS deployments in Azure. That's its origination. That's how it started, both from a security posture management point of view, as well as real-time detections for servers. This was prior to MDE being able to have before it had any capabilities around servers, Windows and Linux. The first time we had detections was from actually Azure Security Center. Now Azure Security Center and Azure Defender, and Azure Defender for servers, specifically Windows and Linux. So as such, if I were deploying now, current state, a server in Azure, there's a pretty rich set of detections, and alerts, detections, however you want to call them, that our threat analysts have created that are part of Azure Defender for servers that are enabled when you essentially enable Azure Defender for servers for those servers in Azure, and those servers can be on-prem. They can be in other clouds as well. It's agent-based, so it collects the data. The data is absorbed into that kind of detection chain. It takes in Microsoft's threat intelligence information, and some of those detections actually will take in platform layer information that's not, I would say, available to customers directly. So it takes that data in, has a rich set of analytics and detections using the typical buzzwords which drive me crazy: machine learning and AI type models, heuristic pattern-based adaptive filtering, looking for true positive types of alerts. And we'll alert you when those servers, again, are in Azure. And that's one of its, I would say, most important values. Now when you combine that with MDE, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Servers, Windows and Linux, gives you even a deeper and richer set of detections and alerts across those servers. So those two things provide a great deal of insight, and they will give a SOC and or just a security team for a customer or a company a sort of a set of eyes that they wouldn't have otherwise across those environments, because they are using some of the same data they might be getting into maybe another endpoint detection device. But one thing that they wouldn't get using any other type of solution, say like CrowdStrike or any other type of endpoint sort of solution, would be, again, the use of the Microsoft TI feed, as well as the Secure Intelligent Graph, whatever the current name is for it, as well as for some of those alerts and detections, platform.
So do you install like both agents, the Azure Defender for servers and the MDE agent, and then there's alerts coming out of Azure Security Center and alerts coming out of MDE? I don't understand how this works.
Perfect. Now they are consolidated in one place as part of Azure Defender. The MDE alerts will feed into that system, as well as, I believe anyway, now vice versa. Ideally, all of your alerts and derived data products from a security perspective would feed into Sentinel. So you truly have that cross all systems kind of view, single pane of glass as best you can get it. Agent-wise, this is an area where they are being consolidated. There's the MDE sensor, as well as the traditional, or was the log analytics agent. And Azure Defender is based on using as its back engine log analytics from a data point of view, as well as from an agent collecting data and telemetry from the server, from the endpoint point of view as well. There is a motion to unify everything. We'll see how all that goes. It's taking a while, but to have one common agent and with some extensions.
So are there different detections between Defender for servers and MDE, or they can hit the same thing, so you're dealing with two alerts?
They're coming together ultimately as one. They will be. That's what I believe and kind of hope for. Right now, there are two different sets of detections and alerts.
All right, so I'm confused right now. So today I can deploy a server, put both agents on there, and get alerts on both sides.
Yep.
Okay,
two detection engines.
Okay.
Yeah, as I understood it too, the detection capabilities are not synchronized and not unified, and they're still mutually exclusive for each other, right? There may be some overlap. They sort of imitate the same type of alerting and detections, but I've seen it where you can Security Center or Azure Defender for Service will see something MDE does not see.
Yep, exactly.
And vice versa.
Yep.
Right. And that lens is just a layman understanding is that one is looking for one thing and one is looking for another thing.
Yeah, and that's together really is a better together kind of story, and that's why they bundled MDE, Microsoft Defender for Endpoints, together with Azure Defender for servers.
Okay, so when you pay for that one license for server, you actually get both services. You get MDE for it and so on. So how do you deploy this?
Deployment's actually very straightforward. You can deploy from Azure Security Center, Azure Defender. Security Center is, like kind of the landing zone GUI, where Azure Defender services are serviced. Both. Anyway, so you can pick and choose what servers you want to deploy to, and it will deploy both agents automatically as you enable it across a subscription and or servers that are external to Azure.
And so external to Azure, there's a manual way, and you can do it through Azure Arc also?
Yep, absolutely.
And internal, you can all, by virtue of running IaaS resources in Azure Defender, is Azure policy another way to either enforce or go back and do post-deployment and say, hey, you are out of bounds on this?
Yeah, you can use Azure policy and their out-of-the-box policies to either audit or deploy if not exist, and configure. Sure.
So,
well,
the one thing
let me ask one more question. So within Azure Security Center, as I've understood it, because I've never really had to cover it as a primary workload of expertise, it seems to be very focused on frameworks and compliance to those frameworks. So what are the top 4 frameworks that Azure Security Center or Azure Defender, to our listeners, I'm bouncing back and forth, right, until all the names across all the Microsoft products don't exist. What are the top 3 or 4 things that automatically, the minute you just do it, it'll know?
Yeah. So no, totally spot on question. So the one, I kind of bucketize Azure Security Center, Azure Defender into 2 primary functions, 2 maybe 3. You've got the security posture management side. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I want to look at, audit, evaluate the control configurations of an as-deployed system in Azure. I want to look at that architecture. I want to see what network controls you have in place. Do you have encryption configured for a customer managed key? So it can go out and evaluate how you've got stuff configured in that. One of its really primary functions. And it does this, basically, it does it through Azure Policy. It's now the security posture management, since it's evaluating control configurations, there's a pretty clear mapping between those control configurations and pretty commonly needed, I would say, compliance regimes and some regulatory frameworks, as well as security frameworks. And so when a customer says, hey, I want to deploy a system in Azure and I need to meet PCI requirements, it's going to be a PCI workload handling credit card information. They can enable and use what we call it's a PCI policy initiative that's built into Azure Security Center, and it'll evaluate the control configurations using Azure Policy behind the scenes, the configuration of your controls across that environment, and map them and describe them, whether or not they meet the control configurations that would meet PCI objectives. So we have a team of people that said, hey, if you're going to use SQL database, if you want to use it in a PCI compliant manner, you have to have it configured this way.
Is it multi-tenant aware for those organizations that act as though they're cost centers or independent businesses? You'll find that a lot of financial entities have these member firms.
Yeah.
So they buy the subscriptions, and then they may allocate subscriptions to fraud department, credit card enablement. So can I create a master thing that says, hey, whatever you may do can be an additive or an enhancement, but it cannot be a deprecation of what the master policy is?
Yeah, luckily, and the team that created Azure Policy, they're very smart about having and being able to at a, and you're probably familiar with the management group layer, the way our Azure is structured. You have at the very top level an Azure enrollment that's associated with an Azure AD tenancy. And the word tenant is overloaded. It's so confusing for most people, including me. So you have an Azure enrollment associated with an Azure AD tenant. And just below that layer, that's when you can start creating what we call departments, accounts, and then ultimately Azure subscriptions. Azure subscriptions are like a block radius. They're almost their own little worlds. And you can deploy things and change things at an Azure subscription level. Let's say you have a corporate-wide set of requirements. Maybe you're, I want to audit and align to NIST 800-53 controls. And we happen to have that inside of Azure Defender, Azure Security Center. We have a NIST 800-53 policy initiative. I can go ahead and, if I'm at that top layer, close to that Azure enrollment or below, create a management group that would then apply, maybe just in an audit state, rules I want across that entire tree from that layer down forward. And I can maybe if I give them permission at a subscription layer, an account layer, let them tinker and change those policies. I might say, no, you can't. I'm going to require you to have them in an audit mode. And that way you can always see and have that sort of governance, oversight, and visibility across your entire world. You can then take those and deploy them across multiple Azure AD tenants. So it's a different identity structure and team, either through Lighthouse or as part of their...
Yeah, Lighthouse. Yeah. I was going with that, especially for MSSPs that are using Lighthouse as their delegation methodology to be able to do these things, right? So I was part of the early, that was sort of like my passion project. I was doing some stuff at Microsoft that I was part of that early adoption and creation of Lighthouse. That's my secret, thing that I did, right? So I was always on these things and learning about, oh my God, this is so cool. Never worked on that team and everything, but if they asked, do you want to be part of this brain trust, they put you in a group, can't say anything about it, not really understanding where they were going with this thing, right? And then now in hindsight, that team or whomever's in charge that had the foresight to say, and this is why this is where I discover how to describe Azure to folks. You gave a description. This is how I do it. You need three things to run Azure. You need permissions.
Money, money,
Right.
money.
Yeah, money. Well, I'm going to get there, right? Yeah. You need permissions, right? You have to have the capability to do what you want to do in it. So maybe that's number three. So I'm going from three all the way up. Number two, you have to have a tenant. Tenant is where you put stuff, resource groups, artifacts, compute. And then you have to have a subscription. And the subscription is how you pay for it. So the tenant is going to be the directory and all these other things right there identified. So how do you pay for it and what are you able to purchase? Where do you put the stuff that you can buy? And then you have the permissions to modify, create, destroy, move things. And if you can keep those three baselines, I forget the blog post of this MVP. He laid it out so eloquently, like this is how you understand it. Because one of the things, not so much anymore, but remember how hard it was to delete an Azure tenant? I don't think you can anymore. You can make it not accessible to yourself, but it's never deleted.
Yeah. It's interesting because Azure started out with only a subscription model. That was it. So you could have subscriptions. The subscriptions were completely isolated from each other. So you only had, and people at that point referred to an Azure subscription as kind of a tenant. But when we started working with larger enterprises, we created a business hierarchical model there where we had essentially an enrollment. And then under an enrollment, because companies were just like, hey, man, I just want one bill. And I want one overarching contractual agreement that I can deploy multiple subscriptions under. Perfect. Alignment for businesses. So we have at that top now an Azure enrollment, and that's associated with an Azure AD tenant. Below that, though, we have departments and accounts. And those are all programmatic. If I've got an Azure department or an Azure account, I can't go into the management portal and deploy a VM. Still can't. That's not the way they work. I have to do that at an Azure subscription layer. So there's this hierarchy. I've got the enrollment. I always get these two backwards: department, account, and then subscriptions. Now, when I have a subscription, the world's your oyster. Now I can go in and do things. Like you said, totally, Edward, you have to have a subscription.
How do you pay for it? And how do you allocate people permissions to pay for it and spin up stuff that you buy? Where do you put the stuff? Tenant, right?
Well,
and then
you put the stuff in a subscription.
Put in a subscription.
Yeah. And that's where it's like that weird hierarchy. That's why we had to do that for enterprise level consumption.
Yeah. And if you don't do this every day, you find it doesn't take long to fall behind in what we do today. Oh. It doesn't take. You can go on vacation, come back dumb.
Every day I come back, I swear I'm looking and I come back dumb. And I'm just like, holy cow.
I come back dumb. I'm like,
I answered a question on our Discord today, the old way versus the new way of doing things in Sentinel. So, hey, we do have a question in the chat, and then I have one other question for you. Trip in chat said, Tom's point, you can deploy two engines for a server environment. That's MDE and Azure Defender for servers. Are there any best practice or things to factor in where you would do it versus not?
Well, good question. So one of the decision points customers generally go through, and this has more to do with things like third-party endpoint solutions, CrowdStrike, for instance. Say your company standard, for better or worse, whatever it might be, you're using CrowdStrike. Now, if I'm deploying servers in Azure and I'm still using CrowdStrike, and you can deploy CrowdStrike on an endpoint, just like you can deploy MDE on an endpoint, MDE for servers. I would still consider using Azure Defender for servers because it will provide detections that would not be part of what CrowdStrike would have visibility into, mostly because of our TI feed and platform level signal. And it's worth considering what those are. And luckily, we do explicitly provide a list It's the reference list for Azure Defender alerts, specifically what they are. So you can go through them and look at them and say, hey, the CrowdStrike's not picking that up. I might want to turn on Azure Defender and do that. But I may not want MD for servers, just for whatever reason, because of CrowdStrike in your deployment of CrowdStrike. And in addition to that, when those servers come with, when you use Azure Defender for servers, they come with some additional controls. They come with adaptive network hardening if those servers are in Azure. They come with JIT, just-in-time access, if those servers are in Azure. And actually, if the servers are anywhere else, they come with a file integrity monitoring capability, as well as adaptive application controls. So there's value there too, where you could say, hey, I want to use Azure Defender for servers and deploy that agent, but I may or may not want MD for servers if I have something else that's doing the same thing. I think MD servers would be better. They work better together. They're complementary, but that's us.
All right. Mm-hmm. So now the next question is, I've got the server out there. Is there any reason for me to use Endpoint Manager dealing with those servers?
This is around, I guess, management functionality.
Right.
Everybody has, typically a customer, when they deploy systems in Azure, they'll generally start off with IaaS, and there'll be server teams. And those server teams will want to manage and handle, watch over, monitor those servers using their existing processes and tool sets. Not a bad thing. If I had to do it, I'd be like, man, I'm going to use what I'm familiar with first. I know it. I've got people that do it. I've got written procedures, processes, around it. And so if those include things like Endpoint Manager, it might be SCOM, it could be any plethora of tools, including third-party tools. May not be a bad thing, at least to start with, until you say, hey, these native capabilities, and there are a lot of good native capabilities, this does it, and actually it does it better, and I've got the learning curve handled, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty easy to use, and that works better for me.
Well, let me go back and be a naysayer on that, right?
Sure.
Because you're assuming that the security team is the one that's managing these things. And I'm going to go back to the one thing that nobody wants to own.
I'm talking about operations and patching. I'm actually not talking about security people. These are
okay. Operations and patching, because nobody wants to own that.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
You talk to the system center and people are like, hey man, Microsoft needs to make their mind up. Is it system center or is it going to be Intune? Oh, it's not Intune anymore. It's MIM.
MIM. Yep.
Right. Well, MIM with an E or MIM with an I. And that's not, you meant FIM. FIM with an E. So you go through these things, right? So, I've seen some outstanding work done in Azure Defender / Azure Security Center. For those who truly embrace it and say, hey, this is how we're going to do this. I can see a lot of work. But if I'm deploying this, let me ask you this. Can I deploy Azure Security Center? And I think I know the answer. I just never have done it this way. Can I deploy Azure Security Center / Azure Defender without having a single IaaS workload deployed?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, man, it's almost like you knew what I was really hoping to talk about too. And this is low-hanging fruit. Talk about immediate value. Customers beyond IaaS and servers. There are lots of different ways to approach it. Lots of different strategies around them. Patching, securing, monitoring, alerting. Now, when it comes to PaaS services, though, however, platform services. And that's really and historically true. It's true. That's where the greatest value proposition is associated with consuming Azure. And that's where Azure started. That's what we were kind of a bit ahead of the curve. We're, in my opinion, Microsoft and PaaS services a little bit too early. Deploying horizontally scalable, stateless designs using platform services, microservices, as it were. But the challenge with that is that, hey, most security teams, SOCs, don't know how to really or effectively monitor those services for security challenges, not from a security configuration perspective or a security posture management perspective, but from hey, there's stuff writing to and reading from these services. It might be a service principal. It might be an application via service principal or managed identity. It might be an actual person. How do I watch over that stuff and alert if there's some indicators that I might be being compromised or attacked? And that's where Azure Defender there's a long list of them now, PaaS services, is low hanging fruit. It's a no-brainer.
I'm finding, just in my own personal observation, and I'm happy, I don't know about you guys, to be in this industry and have this skill set. Now it's just not a buzzword. It's being seen as a necessary thing. You can either, as my wife would say, you can pay right or pay twice. Right. Yep. You can figure out how you want to do it. But I am seeing the technology outstrip and outpace, the capability of SOC analysts, because now the SOC analysts are seeing themselves have a resurgence of availability, salary, appreciation of burnout is a real thing. But the problem is, even if you set all of this stuff up and these alerts are coming in, I'm starting to see something that seems to be very troubling to me now. That SOC analyst is also sometimes responsible for the IR and the resolution. Mm-hmm. Wait a minute, I got to monitor it, then I got to go fix it. Yep. Now, mature places into the SOC, and then the SOC triage, and it goes to the applicable people, even if it's not a critical. We got an alert, man. You guys need to go patch this group of web Apache servers, right? You got to go do this, right? But now you see the SOC analyst. I've seen SOC analysts remediate an issue and cause a security gap.
Absolutely.
Because they did not know what they were doing, yep. Right? Their job was to make the alert go away, right? Yeah. And resolve the incident because it's a ticker going, right? That thing goes over to ServiceNow, and now these ticket watchers and efficiency watchers are saying, man, that ticker's been open a week.
Yeah.
Don't you see the paperwork that tickets have to be resolved within 48 hours? You got to create. Nobody wants that critical incident on their watch, right? Not incident, but that critical, the ticket automatically upgrades because it's been open too long, right? So what is your opinion around it? Because sometimes customers are reluctant to put these tools in that can let them know what's going on, because once you know, you got to do something about it.
Can I jump in here real fast? Tom, can you explain that when you have an alert and an incident in Azure Defender, how is there an automation to resolve issues? So you press a button, everything's fine, or is it manual steps? Does it give you a hint what you should do? How are incident responders dealing with these alerts with inside Azure Defender? Even all the different services. Let's say there's something going on in Azure SQL for brute or a SQL injection going on. Let's say so. How do you see them? How is response taking place?
Really interesting question, Frank. Spot on. It's a new dynamic, kind of like what Edward was saying too, for a lot of security teams. Whether or not they have and almost everyone has some type of incident response responsibility, whether it's a separate team or not, whether the analysts end up having to take care of it, whether or not they go back to the original engineering teams or even a discipline team to help address and handle that, mitigate both the actual real-time, call it an incident, and or correct whatever was systemically a problem that resulted in that incident to occur. And the challenge is it often requires the context of the architecture and the actual services that are part of that system. It's not as simple as, say, an alert on a server anymore. You get an alert on some type of PaaS service, it's part of a system. Do you know what I mean? Just like a server can be part of, or is usually part of a system. So one thing that I'm finding with most customers is the SOC analyst is becoming and has to become more and more system and workload kind of aware. Because if you have some type of challenge or alert associated with a PaaS service, it's almost always associated with how that service was configured and used as part of a system. And this is something I harp on all the time with customers, having the appropriate documentation of all things, old school documentation, around what that service is in the context of its architecture. If you don't have that, you don't know anything. You have to recreate it, and maybe it's the SOC analyst recreating it. Shame, because that's a hard thing to do. They know where it is with respect to the rest of the system. They might be able to take action, or at least work with the incident response team or the system engineer, the system architect to take.
Doesn't Azure Defender give you like some hints about what you should be doing in the scenarios? So explain what's provided on what information is provided on the alert and incident to help the SOC analyst to resolve the issue.
And it's very good this way. It'll give you information associated with the incident, and by incident, if it's truly an incident that comes out of a fusion of multiple alerts, it will give you some insight into the context of the related services that either might have been touched or used as part of the attack, and then provide suggestions as to how to mitigate it. So it is pretty proactive that way, and provides good guidance for a SOC analyst and or incident responder to correct it.
I mean, I think that a lot of IR teams are talking about is, hey, we want a playbook on how to fix this, right? And so what I found interesting about Azure Defender is the fact that they actually provide that information for the alerts that are coming across. They basically give you, step by step, here's what you should be looking at doing, even though I don't think it does all of that stuff automatically, because in theory you could break things if you go out and do that automatically, but it does give you the playbook on how you should go about handling the incident and the alert, which I think is very valuable.
In my opinion, I think that's easy, because first of all, there is a sense of restraint on touching server class workloads, because you can impact many, which is the reason you don't see as many recommendations for endpoint stuff, because it's so dynamic. If you talk to an end user, I say, what did you do? I didn't do anything. Of course you didn't. Of course I didn't click on this, right? So it's going to be much harder to create these recommendations and these flow points when you're trying to remediate an endpoint rather than a server class workload, right? Because on the server workload, I know that there's only a certain amount of entities, people that should be accessing these things.
Well, I think the endpoint is a different scenario, because do you want to quarantine the machine and let the attacker know that that they're there? There's a lot of things that outside of like I said, you have to figure out what's the best way you're going to get the attacker out of there and realize what they've done. Which, when you're talking about remediating for an Azure Defender, if I go out and say, oh, I'm going to block this now or whatever, or this port, change this rule or whatever, how many other things did I just break? So I think that on the endpoint, you're not as worried about breaking things. You're more worried about managing the attacker. And where in Azure Defender, you're more about possibly breaking a lot of stuff that's going to impact a lot of users. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I'm right on it.
You don't know how the piece interacts with the broader functionality you're trying to.
And that's the documentation that you were talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's interesting, because it's a new space for many people, and it really comes down to handling, watching over, and reacting to alerts and incidents across. And sometimes I don't like the word PaaS, but say PaaS/microservices, because it's the system that's providing the functionality. It's not just code running on a server. It's a system of microservices, and how they're configured and how they interact together result in your overall security posture. And if you had a challenge or a problem with one, you may, in the course of mitigating that attack, if there truly was an attack, or investigating an alert, you could break the functionality of the entire thing. Mm-hmm. So it's an area that's just new for some people, and new for most people. And luckily, Defender does a good job. It does, in terms of watching out for those patterns around those different services that would indicate some type of problem, first of all, which is really hard to do. Let me give you a quick example. This is what comes up early on. Say storage, right? Almost every service in Azure emits a log of some type, either a metric or a log. And the log is what we call the data plane interaction. All the reads and writes interaction with the service. There's a record of it. plus some context, some type of data. You can take all of that data, say for a storage account, and this is what people did before we had like Azure Defender for servers. You pull all that into a SIEM. So you got a production workload, you're handling and managing all the credit card information associated with that application in raw Azure Blob storage. I want that record. I want all those writes and reads to and from that service. And I want the information around the application that's writing and reading to that storage blob. Now I could take that data, I could pull it into Splunk, for instance, and that's what people were doing originally, or some whatever tool. And I can try to write analytic tools looking for behaviors that might be indicative of an attack or a compromise. That's not easy. That's really hard to do with costly people. And so that's why Azure Defender for these individual PaaS services, kind of why they're creating them, because it's really not easy for a customer to do on their own. And here's a service that can do that out of the box just by enabling it and provide that insight. That's where there's kind of low-hanging fruit value, associated with the use of things like Defender for PaaS services. Because if you're kind of on your own.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a no-brainer. In other words.
And as we close this out, let me say this about other clouds, and they're going to have something similar, right? I don't know what they are. To our listeners that have customers, I would say if you have PaaS, IaaS, and some of the SaaS services, I think there are a few that they'll look at, right? Because the way it interacts with. The bar is low to turn this on. You can turn it on. It's totally non-invasive unless you just don't want the information, because when you have to go do something, right? So I tell customers, you can turn this on. It can be non-invasive, right? And I know that sometimes the cost thing seems to be able to turn to a lot of individuals, right? Oh my God, $15 a head, right? Right. But turn on the free. And pet peeve, don't call it free and standard. Yeah, come on, we've been doing this how long? Let's get something else now, right? Yeah. Free and standard, right? So I tell customers, turn it on, right? Because guess what you can do? You can turn it off.
Exactly. Yeah.
You if you get sticker shock, overload, oh my God, my manager's gonna see this, they're gonna think I'm not doing my job. Turn it off really quick and go back and you can measure the stuff out. So
yeah. I got one more thing, and then we'll close out. So in SC200, Learning Path 3, Part 3, mitigating threats using Azure Defender. We talk about if you go out to the Learn module, we'll talk about the difference between Azure Defender versus Azure Security Center. And then the next section, which is 6 months old, so I'm sure nothing's changed in this area, explain the cloud workload protections in Azure Defender. So one of the things that the focus on SC200 was understanding what's actually being protected and the alerts or the detections that are taking place on each one of those. So this is a good place to start, other than the docs about this, to figure out what's going on. And then the last section here talks about managing alerts with inside Azure Security Center and responding and taking the their take action section. I don't know if the alerts still look like that, and so on. So if you want to get up to speed on this and what's being protected, this is a good place to start, even though it's a little, probably most likely out of date, especially on what the detections are and probably the services from there.
I think that this exam is not easy, and I think it should get harder, especially after I pass. It should be unbearably hard to pass. But look at how much information you have to cover. So you can't fake it, right? One of the things, and we'll get ready to get out of here. I know we started late, but one of the things I was sort of suggesting, maybe we'll come on, we'll talk about certifications, because I believe we need to have an episode on, right, what is the value of certifications, and are certifications measuring the right things? I think that the SC200 is more of a composite or all up exam. I think there should be underlying exams, right? 2 paths. M365 path that eventually gets you able to pass this, and then maybe an Azure Defender path that gets you able to pass this. Because right now, this is a measure.
No, I think that we just have the SC XDR exam and then leave it at that.
That might be a thing. I mean, we're throwing this out, right? Because I had the same issue when I was we had to renew Cisco exams, right? When you had to, it's easy to go take a qualifying exam. So because if you got to go back and take the other one to get your CCNP renewed, it's a bear, right? Because that iOS, like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, right? And exams are not necessarily real world. I'll tell everybody in a minute. It's a luck of the draw in combination with knowledge and a bunch of other things. Because if you're looking at it, that's not how I would do something, right? If I'm trying to solve, that's a totally different thing. I failed my very first exam for Microsoft. I was taking an NT4 exam, failed it, which in Frank's word means the exam was valid. So I went back and I showed the first at the instructor place. I think I was going to Global Knowledge or something, right? Are they still in business? Global Knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And the guy said, he was a friend of mine and an instructor. He said, the reason you failed, Edward, is because you went in there and tried to prove what you know. Nobody asked you what you knew. They asked you, do you understand the objectives to pass this exam? Go pass the exam. And I changed my entire mindset after that. And so I approach exams a little bit different. And so the SC200 is a very, very, very good course material. It is very good exam. It's one of the few that open disclosure, Tom, I don't know if you know, Frank is a major contributor to the exam and all of the content that you see online. Go look at the credits. That's him. So, but hey, this has been informative. I think if nothing else for our users, they should go out, and if you haven't touched Azure Security Center, Azure Defender for servers, and Azure Defender, as Tom said, there are Azure Defenders for like storage accounts, Azure Defender for like Key Vault, Azure Defender for IoT. All of these defenders are really sort of focused on cloud centric workloads. And then once you start divvying out of that, you start looking at things like Azure Arc and a few other things, right? Definitely take a look at it. I think in the remaining part of the year, definitely in the next year, I'm going to have the bone up on it, right? Because they're not. If the SC200 is not indicative of what is expected of you to know, you got to sort of know this stuff. And then sometimes it's not even at a journeyman's level, right? I won't say expert, but you can't be here. And if the middle is here, you got to be on this side of middle in your knowledge. You can't be on this side of middle, man. This stuff is, like I said, go on vacation, come back, you're dumb. You just and do that. So this is really good. I think.
And remember, exam questions are updated every single few months. So even though this content's 6 months out of date, that doesn't mean the exam's going to be back at 6 months old. So just keep that in mind.
That's a very good observation and
right.
comment on that too.
All right,
this
Edward.
has been great. Hey, Frank, I need to talk to you tomorrow, man. I want to ask you a question about something I'm seeing, and I don't. It looks like I will pull you about. I'm saying I'm running some queries in Sentinel, and I wanted to ask you. It looks like a username that I have out there has been exposed to the big bad world, and I'm seeing people attacking it from Urin, Gaza, Rakakiskerburg, Dundee, Yavravan. I get. They don't give me the. They don't give me the country scene.
Pasadena, Maryland.
Pasadena, Maryland.
No, not Pasadena. Probably that's where that's a notorious, hive or hackers, right? Shadow brokers, right?
Yeah.
Tom, thank you so much for your time, sir. We're about to get out of here. You're always welcome on the show. You don't have to be invited. If you want to come on and talk about it, anything that you think is interest to our users. Plus, we'll get information about you so we can advertise you on your social media outlets, whether you be on LinkedIn, Twitter, FaceSpace, or BookMy, whatever they got out there these days, right?
Thanks for having me, guys. I really
for sure.